This rule snippet is going to be looking at friendly units blocking line of sight in Team Yankee and Flames of War. As usual, the rules mentioned in this video are from the Team Yankee version 2 and Flames of War version 4 rule sets. I've seen a lot of games where this scenario has played out. A long line of tanks, not always Soviet but their forces lend themselves to this, attacking in two waves. The shooting player then often wants to shoot all the guns at the enemy. There are significant dangers to friendly troops in doing this, and the line of sight rules in Flames of War and Team Yankee reflect this. Page 51 in the Flames of War rulebook and page 40 for Team Yankee state that friendly teams block line of sight. This means shooting teams that would have to fire through or over friendly teams to hit an enemy team can't fire. There's just too much risk to the friendly teams in the firing line. Note that this rule is for line of sight for shooting. Friendly teams don't block line of sight for artillery spotters or line of sight for command or similar issues like movement orders. You just can't target direct fire through a friendly team. So in our scenario here, the rear rank of tanks is blocked from firing by the friendly tanks of the front row, unless they can draw line of sight to an enemy team that doesn't intersect the friendlies. Line of sight is also blocked if a line of tanks try to engage a target on their flanks. In this case, the right-handmost tank can fire at the enemy missile team, but it blocks the line of sight for all the other tanks in the line abreast formation. Remember that terrain never blocks line of sight to flying aircraft and helicopters. Teams can shoot AA fire over friendly teams. The high angle of fire when engaging aircraft passes safely over the heads of friendlies in front of the shooting team. The only real exception to friendly teams blocking line of sight is stationary infantry teams. Friendly teams can engage enemy teams over stationary infantry, who are probably lying down if they know what's good for them. The infantry don't have to be in foxholes, they just need not to have moved in their movement step. But moving infantry do block line of sight. If they move in front of the guns of another team, that blocked team can't shoot through them. I've done this during games, advancing infantry teams forward and messing up and blocking shots from other teams. However, the rules do offer a way around friendlies blocking line of sight. The line of sight through gaps rule specifies that gaps less than 3/4 of an inch or 20 mm between two pieces of terrain or friendly teams block line of sight. So leaving a 20 mm or larger gap between your friendly teams opens up a corridor for other friendly teams to shoot through. Each unit shooting through the gap would still have to find a valid line of sight to an enemy team to shoot it, but at least this gap gives enough of a fire corridor for you to shoot. Remember that line of sight is drawn from the weapon mounting of a tank team, any part of an infantry team's base, or any point of an aircraft's flight stand, and it needs to intersect any part of a tank team excluding weapons, anywhere on an infantry base, or any point on an aircraft's flight stand. If you can draw a line to connect the relevant part of the firing team to the specified position of the enemy team and aren't blocked by terrain or friendly teams, you have line of sight. Note the blocking rule only covers friendly teams. Line of sight is not blocked by enemy teams. If there are other enemy teams in the way of the enemy teams you want to shoot at, that's too bad. Nobody cares if an enemy tank is riddled with bullets while you're firing at the infantry team behind it. This means a player can't hide one team behind another and expect it to stop enemy fire. However, this story changes a bit when the tank team is destroyed. Destroyed tank teams stay on the table as wrecks. Wrecks are considered short terrain and provide concealment and bulletproof cover. So teams can take cover behind wrecks, and infantry teams get some protection from incoming fire. This rule is on page 43 of the Flames of War rulebook and page 33 in Team Yankee. Team Yankee also gives the same rules for aircraft wrecks, something I hadn't realised. Probably the last thing to mention about line of sight concerns defensive fire. The opponent's defensive fire section of both the Team Yankee and Flames of War rules state that defending infantry teams do not block line of sight for defensive fire. During the defensive fire portion of the assault step, they're considered stationary, no matter what their movement in their last turn. So any friendly teams that are eligible to conduct defensive fire can do so over or through defending infantry. So let's recap. Friendly teams block line of sight during shooting. If a team doesn't have clear line of sight to enemy teams, it can't shoot. The only exception is stationary infantry. These do not block line of sight. Friendly teams can shoot over them. Friendly teams can draw valid line of sight through gaps between other friendly teams provided the gap is greater than 3/4 of an inch or 20 mm wide. All the normal rules of drawing line of sight between teams apply, but as long as they can target an enemy team, they can fire through the gap between friendlies. Enemy teams never provide any form of concealment, nor do they block line of sight. However, wrecks are short terrain and offer both concealment and bulletproof cover. Friendly infantry teams don't block line of sight for defensive fire. All defending infantry teams are counted as stationary when firing defensive fire, allowing all friendly teams to fire over them. So that's the rules for line of sight and friendly teams. It's an aspect of the line of sight rules I've seen a few people getting wrong, and there were parts of it I wasn't familiar with either. Not being able to fire through friendlies does make sense. It will really affect how people can play some larger armies like Soviet and Iranian infantry or East German tanks. You need to think about how teams move to avoid blocking the shots of any following forces. But there are rules to work around this limitation using gaps to space teams out that will still allow you to engage. The side effect of this might be to break up some of the track-to-track tank parks. Understanding that enemy teams don't block your shooting is also important. You can choose to fire past all those onrushing enemy tanks to try and hit the AA vehicles further back. And the defensive fire rule that treats defending infantry as stationary will make sure you get the best out of any units close enough to contribute to defensive fire. I hope this video has helped you understand this interesting and important rule in Flames of War and Team Yankee. I have a couple of other rules videos in development, but the research, graphics and filming take some time. Are there any rules you'd like to see covered? Let me know in the comments and I'll put it on the list.